My son was dying and he needed my kidney. My daughter-in-law told me, "It's your responsibility. You're his mother." The doctor was already getting ready to operate on me when suddenly, my 9-year-old grandson ran into the room and screamed, "Grandma, should I tell them the real reason Dad needs your kidney?" The entire medical team froze right there. I'm glad you're here. If you're watching this video, give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're listening to my revenge story from. I want to know how far it's reached. I'm lying on the cold steel of the operating table, the white light from the surgical lamp beating down on my eyes. So blinding I want to squeeze them shut, but I can't. My whole body is stiff, and it's not from the cold, but from a suffocating feeling, like fate has its hands wrapped around my neck. The steady beep of the heart monitor is a constant rhythm, but every beat feels like a hammer pounding in my head. I can hear every sound in the room with perfect clarity. The metallic clinking of instruments as the nurse arranges them, the rustle of paper as Dr. Evans reviews my chart, and even the soft whispers from the other side of the glass, where my daughter-in-law, Jessica, is standing with her parents. I try to look up through the frosted glass. There's Jessica, her arms crossed over her chest, her gaze as sharp as a razor. She's whispering something to her parents, but her eyes never leave me, as if she's ordering me, "Sign it. Just do it. Don't hesitate." I already signed it, the consent form to donate my kidney to Mike, my son. That piece of paper must be somewhere on the doctor's desk now, with my shaky signature on it. A promise I can't take back. The nurse already has the syringe in her hand, the anesthesia glistening under the light. I close my eyes and try to take a deep breath, but my chest feels like it's filled with lead. I think of Mike, my oldest son, the one I raised and sacrificed my whole life to protect. He's in the next room, weak, waiting for my kidney to survive. I tell myself this is the right thing to do. As a mother, I have to. But why do I feel this emptiness in my soul, this nameless dread? Suddenly, a loud crash startles me. The operating room door has flown open, and a blast of cold air rushes in, making the tray of instruments on the table tremble and clink. The whole room seems to hold its breath. I open my eyes, trying to lift my head, though the straps hold me down tight. Danny, my 9-year-old grandson, burst in like a little whirlwind. His sneakers were covered in mud, his school uniform was wrinkled, and his little chest was heaving as he gasped for breath. Behind him, a terrified nurse was chasing after him, yelling as she ran, "Kid, you can't be in here!" Oh my God, stop him! But Danny didn't stop. He ran straight to me, his big round eyes filled with fear, but also with determination. "Grandma," he said, his voice trembling but so clear it squeezed my heart. "Should I tell them the real reason my dad needs your kidney?" The entire room fell silent. The beeping of the heart monitor now seemed louder, as if it wanted to tear through the space. A nearby doctor dropped a pair of surgical forceps. The sound of the metal hitting the tile floor was jarring like a tear in the tension. I looked at Danny, my sweet grandson, the one I still held in my arms and read stories to every night. There he was, clutching an old cell phone, his face pale but his eyes shining. What did he know? Why would he say that? My heart was racing like it was trying to beat its way out of my chest. I wanted to scream, to ask him right then and there, but my throat was so dry I couldn't make a sound. Dr. Evans, the head surgeon, frowned. He raised a hand, signaling the entire team to stop. His voice was deep but sharp. "Whatever you have to say it now." I saw his gaze move past me and land on Danny, as if he too was caught in this strange moment. On the other side of the glass, Jessica slammed a hand on the door, making the window rattle. "Don't listen to him," she shrieked, her voice high-pitched, almost hysterical. "He's just a kid. What does he know?" But Jessica's gaze wasn't cold anymore. It was trembling, filled with panic, as if a secret was about to be exposed. Danny didn't look at his mom. He just looked at me, gripping the cell phone in his little hand so tightly his knuckles turned white. He took a deep breath, as if he was gathering all the courage in his life. I wanted to sit up, to hug him, to tell him not to be afraid, but I couldn't move. I could only watch, and in my little grandson's eyes, I saw a pain, a truth that he was trying to bring to light. In that instant, as the whole room held its breath, Memories of the past flooded my mind like an avalanche. From those days when I thought my family was a tight circle, full of love and trust. I remembered my old house, where every corner smelled of disinfectant, a smell I'd gotten so used to I didn't even notice it anymore. I'm 57, but sometimes I feel so much older, as if time had stolen my energy long ago. My husband John has been bedridden for over 10 years. He sits in his old wheelchair, its wheels squeaking every time I push him out to the patio for some fresh air. He hardly ever speaks, just lets out a sigh now and then, his gaze lost in the distance. Once I took his hand and asked, "John, are you tired of this life?" He just blinked, not answering. I don't know if he understood me or if I was just talking to myself. That house was my whole world, the place where I raised my 2 sons, Mike and Chris. I did everything to give them a good life. I'd get up at dawn to go sell fruit at the market. In the afternoons, I'd sew clothes for the neighbors. And sometimes I'd stay up past midnight mending torn shirts to deliver them on time. My hands grew rough and calloused. My fingernails always had dirt under them from digging through crates at the market. But I never complained. I just wanted Mike and Chris to have a better life, so they wouldn't suffer like I did. Mike, my oldest, was my pride and joy. He was strong, tall, worked in construction, and always came home with a loud laugh. But in the last few years, he started getting weaker. At first, it was just fatigue. Then, little by little, I saw him get pale, with sunken eyes. And once, I felt a horrible terror when he told me he was peeing blood. I hugged him and asked, "Mike, what's wrong, honey? Tell me." He just shook his head and gave a weak smile. "Don't worry, Mom. It's probably just from working too hard." Jessica, my daughter-in-law, came into our lives like a strange wind. She was pretty, spoke sweetly, and at first, I really thought she was a blessing for Mike. She took such good care of him, brought home medicine, watched his meals, and reminded him to take his pills at the exact right time. All the neighbors would praise me. "You're so lucky, Sarah, to have such a good daughter-in-law." And I believed it too. Every time I saw Jessica give Mike a bowl of soup, I'd tell myself I was worrying for nothing. But sometimes I'd catch her look, cold and calculating, like she was hiding something. I saw her on the patio, whispering on the phone in the middle of the night. Her voice low but rushed. "Don't worry. Everything is going according to plan." I asked her, "Jessica, who are you calling so late?" She jumped and laughed nervously. "Just a friend, Mom. You should go back to bed." Chris, my younger son, was different. He's 26, lives a few blocks away, and works as a plumber and electrician. Chris doesn't talk much, but every time he stopped by to visit, he'd always bring something to eat, sometimes oranges, other times a loaf of bread that was still warm. He'd sit with me, fixing the squeaky ceiling fan or changing a light bulb in the kitchen. Once he looked at me and said in his deep voice, "Mom, don't kill yourself working like this. I don't want to see you so worn out." I just smiled and waved my hand. "I can still handle it, Chris. You worry about your brother, he needs you more." But Chris just shook his head, his eyes full of concern. Danny, my sweet grandson, was my only joy in those heavy days. He's 9 and would often come to my house with his little backpack on. Danny liked to sit on the patio and play with some little plastic cars I bought him at the flea market. He'd tell me stories, innocent tales that sometimes left me chilled. Once he looked at me with his round eyes and said, "Grandma, my mom talks on the phone at night. I heard her say something about some medicine, but I didn't understand." I smiled and ruffled his hair. "She was probably asking the doctor something for your dad. Don't think so much about it, sweetie." But inside me, a seed of unease had started to sprout. And then one afternoon, everything changed. I was in the kitchen making dinner, the smell of toasted rice floating in the air, when Jessica walked in. She didn't say hello, didn't smile, just stood there with her arms crossed. Her voice was sharp like a knife cutting through the air. "Mom, the doctor says your kidney is the only match. It's your responsibility. You have to save him." I froze, the spoon in my hand clattering into the pan with a loud thud. I looked at her, trying to find some warmth in her eyes, but all I saw was a cold determination, almost a demand. Jessica, I know. I'll do anything for Mike, I whispered, but my throat felt dry. She nodded as if she'd achieved her goal and turned to leave. Not even 10 minutes passed before Jessica's parents showed up. They walked into my house like they owned it, sat down at the dining table and said in unison, "That's right. A mother's duty is something you can't run from. This whole family is depending on you now." I just stood there, still holding the spoon, feeling trapped. Mike, who was leaning against a chair at that moment, so thin I barely recognized him, took my hand. It was ice cold. "Mom," he whispered, "I know you'll save me." I looked into his eyes, the same eyes that used to shine with so much life when he was a boy, and now only reflected exhaustion and pleading. I nodded, unable to say anything, suddenly feeling like the small room had become suffocating. The smell of medicinal herbs from John's pot in the corner made me feel like I couldn't breathe. That night, I brought John his bowl of soup like I did every day. The squeak of his wheelchair on the cement floor was a constant reminder that I was carrying this whole family on my shoulders. I put the bowl in front of him and looked at him, but he just sighed, saying nothing. I wanted to tell him, to ask him if I was doing the right thing, but he was just there, motionless, like a shadow. I went out to the patio, where Danny was playing with his little car. He looked up, his eyes bright but full of doubt. "Grandma, what if someone gets sick because another person gives them medicine?" I stopped in my tracks, my heart skipping a beat. "Why do you ask that, sweetie?" I said, trying to stay calm. But Danny just looked down and kept pushing his car without answering. What I didn't know was that, in that moment, I was standing on the edge of a cliff, and just a few more steps would send me falling. In the days after that afternoon, when Jessica came to my house and left me with no choice, my life felt crushed by an invisible pressure, heavier than the sweltering summer heat. I kept getting up early, going to the market to sell my vegetables and oranges, sitting under the dim light to sew clothes. But my soul was no longer at peace. Every step I took, every stitch I made, carried a question with it. Am I doing the right thing? Do I really have to sacrifice myself like this? But then, Mike's pleading look, Jessica's sharp words, and her parents' judging stares would cling to me, giving me no room to breathe. The next morning, as the sun was just beginning to rise, Jessica was already at my door. I had just made some tea, the scent of mint barely starting to fill the house, when she walked in without knocking, without a greeting. "Mom," she said, her voice as firm as a nail, "the doctor says there isn't much time left. If you keep hesitating, he could be in danger." She placed a stack of medical papers on the dining table, white sheets full of numbers and signatures that I didn't fully understand. She pointed to each line, as if she were teaching a child. "It says right here that you are the only match. No one else can save him." I just stood there, holding the teapot, the hot water burning my fingers, but I felt no pain. I just listened to the sound of my broom scraping against the cement as I started to sweep the house, as a way to escape Jessica's gaze. "I heard you," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I'll do anything for Mike." But inside, a heavy rock was pressing down on me, making me want to scream, to run away. I kept sweeping, the sound of the broom like a sad rhythm trying to drown out Jessica's words. But she didn't stop. She stood there watching me, as if waiting for me to nod one more time to confirm that I wouldn't dare refuse. When she left, I sat down in a chair and covered my face with my hands. I thought of Mike, of the days when he was little and would run after me at the market, grabbing my skirt and laughing, "Mom, when I grow up, I'm going to build you a beautiful house." Now he was lying there, thin, pale, reduced to a shadow of his former self. I wondered if I could just let him go without doing anything. But every time I thought about donating my kidney, fear washed over me. Not a fear of the surgery, but the feeling that I was being pushed towards something bigger, darker, that I couldn't see clearly. That evening, Jessica's parents arrived. They brought a fruit basket, some mangoes and oranges, but they just left it on the table like an afterthought and sat in the two main chairs in the living room as if they owned the place. Her father, Mr. Clark, coughed a couple of times and said in a raspy voice, "In my day, parents would sacrifice everything for their children. My grandmother sold all her land to save her son. Now it's your turn. You have to do the same." Jessica's mother, Mrs. Clark, nodded, her gaze as sharp as a knife. "If you refuse, this family's honor will be ruined. What will the neighbors say? They'll say you don't love your son, that you don't deserve to be a mother." I sat there, gripping the edge of the table, feeling cornered in a dark room. I wanted to say something, to ask them why the entire burden was falling on me, but I couldn't open my mouth. I just lowered my head and gave a slight nod like a robot. Dinner that night felt as heavy as a funeral. Jessica, with a fake kindness, put a piece of chicken on my plate. But her voice was cold. "Eat! Mom, you need to save your strength for the surgery." I looked at the chicken on my plate, but I couldn't swallow. Mike was sitting across from me, his face gaunt and his eyes sunken. He tried to smile weakly. "Mom, I know you'll save me, just like all the times you saved me when I was a kid." His words were like a stab to my heart. I remembered the days he had a high fever, and I'd stay up all night wiping him down with damp cloths, or the times he fell off his bike, and I'd run to bandage his wounds. I was always there, always the mother willing to do anything. But this time, why did I feel so much fear? Chris was sitting in a corner of the table, silent as a shadow. He didn't eat, just stirred his spoon in his soup, never taking his eyes off Jessica. I saw his look, full of suspicion, as if he were trying to see through my daughter-in-law's mask. I wanted to ask him, but I didn't dare. The air in the room was thick. The only sound was the clinking of spoons against plates, like hammers on my conscience. After dinner, Jessica got up and personally took Mike's plate to the kitchen to wash it, not letting anyone else touch it. She did it quickly, but I noticed her check the plate carefully, as if she were afraid someone might see something in it. I couldn't sleep that night. Lying in my old bed, I listened to the ticking of the clock on the wall, each second a reminder that Mike's time was running out. I got up, walked down the hall to get a glass of water. Then I heard whispers coming from Jessica and Mike's room. I stopped, standing in the darkness, holding my breath. Jessica's voice was low but clear. "Yes, after the transplant, we'll have all the data. Don't worry. She won't dare to refuse." I stood there, my heart pounding, my hands shaking so much I had to lean against the wall to keep from falling. Data? What were they talking about? I wanted to knock on the door to confront her, but just then Jessica opened it. She jumped when she saw me, then gave a fake smile. "Still awake, Mom? I was just calling to ask about his medicine." I nodded and turned away, but I felt as if thorns had been driven into my heart. Jessica's smile, her voice, it was all fake, like a mask hiding something terrible. In the days following the tense conversation with Jessica and her parents, I felt like I was living in a hazy dream, where everything familiar became strange and terrifying. I kept doing my daily chores, going to the market to sell, sewing clothes, feeding my husband, John. But every action was mechanical, soulless. My heart was heavy, as if a dark cloud was hanging over my head, and Jessica's words, Mike's pleading eyes, spun around in my mind, giving me no peace. But then, one afternoon, when Danny, my 9-year-old grandson, came over, the first crack appeared in the wall of trust I was trying to hold up. Danny came in, his sneakers stained with mud, and his little hands still sticky with paint from art class. He dropped his old backpack in a corner, sat on the floor, and pulled out the little plastic car I had bought him at the flea market last year. I looked at him, trying to smile, but my mind was a tangled mess. Danny had always been a little light in my dark days, with his innocent stories and his crystal-clear laugh. But that day he didn't smile. He pushed the car back and forth on the floor, his gaze distant, and then suddenly he looked up and stared at me. "Grandma," he said in a low but clear voice, "what if Dad isn't sick because of life stuff, but because someone is giving him medicine on purpose?" I flinched as if I'd been slapped. The spoon in my hand almost fell, but I managed to hold on, trembling. "Why would you say that, Danny?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm, but my heart was pounding. I looked into his eyes, so clear but filled with a worry that seemed too big for his age. Danny didn't answer right away. He looked down and kept playing with his car, but I saw him clench his fist as if he were holding something back. I wanted to hug him, to ask him more, but all I could do was give a nervous laugh. "You think too much, sweetie. Your dad is sick and the doctors are helping him." But my smile was forced, and Danny didn't return it. He just looked at me, stood up silently, grabbed his backpack and ran home. Danny's question was like a stone thrown into the calm lake of my heart, creating ripples of doubt. I stood there in my small kitchen, staring at the vegetables on the table, but unable to focus. I thought about Mike, about the pill bottles Jessica always brought, about how she controlled everything related to my son. I told myself I was probably imagining things. Jessica was Mike's wife. She loved him. She wouldn't hurt him. But deep in my heart, I knew something wasn't right. That afternoon, Chris stopped by. He had his toolbox with him, saying he came to fix the kitchen light that had been flickering the night before. I watched him climb the ladder, twist and tighten things, and the new bulb lit up the whole kitchen. But then, as he came down with the old bulb in his hand, Chris looked at me with an unusual seriousness. "Mom," he said in a low voice, almost a whisper, "my sister-in-law is acting really weird." I saw some unlabeled pill bottles in my brother's medicine cabinet, and she hides them really well. I jumped and dropped the plate I was washing in the sink, splashing water all over my shirt. "What are you saying?" I asked, my voice breaking. Chris came down from the ladder and stood in front of me, his eyes filled with worry. "Mom, I'm afraid my brother's sickness isn't normal. I'm afraid someone is purposely..." He didn't finish the sentence, but his look said it all. I just stood there, my hands wet, feeling like the floor was sinking beneath my feet. I wanted to scream, to tell Chris he was overthinking it, that Jessica couldn't do something so terrible. But I couldn't speak. I just stared at Chris, and in my head, Danny's question echoed again. What if Dad is sick because someone is giving him medicine? I tried to push the thought away, but it clung to me like a shadow I couldn't escape. The next day at noon, I brought some soup to the hospital for Mike. The white room and the sharp smell of disinfectant made me feel like I couldn't breathe. Mike was lying there, thin, with IV lines in both arms, but he still tried to smile when he saw me. "Mom, you're here," he said in a weak voice. I put the bowl on the little table, and just as I was about to give him the first spoonful, I saw Jessica next to the bed, holding a glass of water. Discreetly, she dropped a strangely colored pill into the glass, a movement so quick that if I hadn't been watching closely, I would have missed it. When I walked in, she jumped and spilled a little water on the floor. "What pill is that, Jessica?" I asked, trying to sound calm. She smiled, but her smile was forced. "It's a kidney supplement. The doctor prescribed it." I nodded, but a chill ran down my spine. I couldn't let it go. After Mike finished eating, I found the doctor on duty, a middle-aged man with thick glasses. "Doctor," I asked with a trembling voice, "did you prescribe any new kidney supplements for Mike?" He looked surprised and checked the chart. "No, we haven't prescribed anything new. The current medication is sufficient." His answer left me frozen. I stood in the hospital hallway, listening to the announcements over the loudspeaker, but my mind was blank. Jessica had lied. What was that pill? Why did she have to hide it? At sunset, Danny came back to my house. This time, he didn't play with his car. He sat in a chair and pulled an old cell phone from his backpack. Its screen cracked in one corner. "Grandma," he said in a low but firm voice, "I want you to hear this." He typed something and handed me the phone. A recording played. It was Jessica's voice, whispering but clear. "After the transplant, the test results will be perfect. Don't worry, she won't dare to refuse." I dropped the phone, my hands shaking uncontrollably. I looked at Danny, my little grandson, and saw that his eyes were red, as if he were just as scared as I was. "I found it on my mom's old phone," he said, his voice breaking. "I don't know what it is, but I thought you should know." I hugged Danny, trying to hold back my tears. "You're so brave, sweetie," I whispered, but inside everything was falling apart. A test? Results? What was Jessica talking about? I thought of Mike, of the unlabeled bottles, of Chris's suspicious look. of the strange colored pill in the glass of water. They were scattered pieces of a puzzle, but little by little they were fitting together, forming a picture I didn't dare to look at. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my silent house, listening to the ticking of the clock, each second a reminder that Mike's time was running out. One morning, I went to the hospital, carrying an old plastic container with hot food, the smell of rice and stewed meat escaping from the edges. Mike's room was white, cold, and the smell of disinfectant was so strong it was hard for me to breathe. I had gotten used to that environment, but that day, it felt like it was crushing my chest. Mike was lying there, his eyes sunken and his face pale, but he still tried to smile when he saw me. "Mom, you're here so early," he said, his voice as faint as a whisper. I put the food on the small table and tried to smile back, but inside, a storm was raging. The doubts from the past few days, Danny's question, Chris's warning, it was all screaming in my head, giving me no peace. Jessica was already there, sitting by Mike's bed, her gaze fixed on the IV bag that was slowly dripping. She didn't look at me, didn't say hello, just gave a silent nod, as if my presence was expected. On the nightstand, I noticed a small pill bottle, its cap not fully closed, half hidden under a crumpled paper napkin. The bottle had no label, just a white plastic container with some strange blue pills inside. I picked it up, trying to keep my voice steady. "What medicine is this, Jessica?" She jumped, almost leaping out of her seat, and snatched the bottle from my hand so fast it made me take a step back. "They're just vitamins, Mom," she said with a smile as fake as peeling paint. "The doctor prescribed them to help his kidney." I nodded, but a chill ran down my spine. Jessica's smile, the way she snatched the bottle, it was all wrong, like she was hiding a secret I wasn't supposed to know. I sat next to Mike and started feeding him, but my mind was somewhere else. I was thinking about the unlabeled bottle, about what Chris had said about the strange medicines Jessica was hiding. I thought about Danny, about his innocent but sharp question. What if Dad is sick because someone is giving him medicine? I wanted to ask Jessica right then and there. I wanted to scream and demand the truth, but I was scared. I was scared that if I opened my mouth, everything would fall apart and I would lose Mike forever. I looked at my son, how he struggled to swallow each bite, and I told myself, "Sarah, you need to calm down. You need to find out what's happening first." At noon, Chris arrived at the hospital. He walked in with his hands still stained with grease from work and his old t-shirt worn out at the shoulders. He didn't say anything, just sat silently in a corner, watching Jessica, who was in the hallway talking to a nurse. When she left, Chris came over to me and pulled a small plastic bag from his backpack. "Mom, I want you to see this," he whispered, his voice as tight as a guitar string. He showed me his phone. On the screen were some blurry photos, but clear enough to make my heart stop. It was Jessica, in the back parking lot of the hospital, discreetly taking a small bag out of the trunk of her car and handing it to an unknown man. The man was wearing a black jacket and a cap that covered most of his face, but I clearly saw the bag of medicine in Jessica's hand, small bottles, identical to the one on the nightstand. "I took these pictures yesterday," Chris said, his voice trembling. "I followed her because she was acting so strange. Mom, I'm scared she's doing something to my brother Mike." I was speechless, gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. The cold hospital floor seemed to be sucking all the warmth from my body. "Chris," I whispered, "are you sure? Did you hear what they were saying?" Chris shook his head, his eyes red. I couldn't hear well, but I saw her give that bag to the man, and he handed her an envelope. "Mom, this isn't normal." I looked into Chris's eyes, saw the worry and anger in them, and I knew he wasn't lying. But still, I didn't want to believe it. Jessica was Mike's wife. She had sworn to take care of him. How could she do something so terrible? That afternoon, when I got home, Danny came over again. He didn't run or play like usual, but sat silently in a chair hugging his backpack. "Grandma," he said, his voice low but determined, "I want you to hear something." He took the old, cracked screen cell phone out of his backpack and with a shaky hand played an audio file. Jessica's voice echoed, whispered but clear, like a knife to my heart. "After the transplant, the data will be complete. Don't worry, that old woman won't dare to refuse. This result is worth 100 times more." I froze, dropping the phone on the table, my hands shaking uncontrollably. I looked at Danny, my little grandson, and saw his red eyes, his lips pressed tight as if holding back tears. "I found it on my mom's old phone," he said, his voice breaking. "I don't know what it is, but I thought you should know." I hugged Danny, feeling as if the whole world was collapsing at my feet. "You're so brave, Danny," I whispered, but my voice broke and tears rolled down my cheeks. I thought of Mike, of the unlabeled bottles, of Chris's photos, of Danny's recording. They were scattered pieces, but they were fitting together, painting a dark picture I didn't dare to face. What was Jessica doing? What data? What results? And why did she say, "That old woman won't dare to refuse"? I felt betrayed, not just by Jessica, but by my own faith in family and love. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my silent house listening to the sirens of an ambulance in the street, the red and blue lights flashing through the window, like cuts in my soul. I thought of Mike, of how he was getting weaker every day, of the strange medicines, of Jessica's calculating whispers. I thought of Chris, of the suspicion and worry in his eyes, and of Danny, the 9-year-old boy who had bravely brought me the truth. I held my head in my hands, feeling like my brain was going to explode. I wanted to run to the hospital, to confront Jessica, to scream and demand an explanation. But I was scared that the truth would be even more horrible than I imagined, scared that I wouldn't have the strength to bear it. I got up, went out to the patio, and looked at the pale moonlight. I thought of John, my silent husband, who could only sit and watch everything. I wanted to tell him, to ask him what I should do, but I knew he wouldn't answer. I was alone, with the pieces of a truth that was slowly revealing itself. The next morning, I woke up feeling like the weight of the world was on my chest. The chirping of birds in the yard, a sound that usually brought me calm, now felt like knives stabbing into my mind. I knew today was the day the hospital would make the final decision about Mike's kidney transplant. The clues Danny and Chris had given me, the recording, the photos, the unlabeled bottle, kept spinning in my head. But I didn't dare face them. I was afraid that if I dug any deeper, I would find a truth I couldn't handle. I just wanted to save Mike, to see my son healthy again, even if the price was a part of my own body. But deep down, I knew things weren't that simple. The hospital scheduled me for a meeting at noon. I walked into a small conference room where Dr. Evans was already waiting for me. He spread the test results across the table, white sheets full of numbers and charts I didn't understand. "Mrs. Miller," he said, his voice serious but firm, "we've reviewed everything thoroughly. You are the most compatible person to donate a kidney to Mike. If we don't proceed soon, his life will be in danger." I sat there, clutching the edge of my blouse, my head buzzing as if there were a swarm of bees inside. "I understand," I whispered, but my voice was so low I wasn't sure if he heard me. Dr. Evans looked at me and his expression softened. "Do you need more time to think about it?" he asked. I shook my head, not because I had already decided, but because I felt like I had no other choice. Jessica, her parents, and even Mike were all counting on me, and I couldn't let my son die. Through the glass of the door, I saw Jessica standing with her arms crossed, her gaze as sharp as ever. She gave a nod to her mother, Mrs. Clark, as if she was certain I wouldn't dare refuse. That gesture sent a chill down my spine, as if they were playing a chess game where I was just a pawn. I wanted to stand up, to scream that I knew about the bottle, about the recording, but I couldn't. I just sat there, feeling trapped in an invisible cage, with no way out. That evening, I gathered the whole family in my small house. The living room was crowded, the yellowish light from an old bulb reflecting off the worn-out walls. I put a teapot on the table. The scent of mint couldn't dispel the heavy atmosphere. Jessica's parents, Mr. and Mrs. Clark, sat in the center, taking the two best chairs as if they were the owners. Jessica sat beside them, her hands clasped, glancing at me to make sure I wouldn't back out. Mike was lying on a sofa, his face pale and his breathing shallow. Chris was leaning against the wall, silent, but his eyes were red, as if he were holding back a rage that was about to explode. Danny was huddled in a corner, hugging his small backpack, his eyes filled with anguish. I took a deep breath, my hands shaking as I set down the teapot. "I've made a decision," I said, my voice trembling but trying to sound firm. "I'm going to donate my kidney to Mike." The room exploded like a bomb. Mrs. Clark clapped her hands, her voice shrill. "That's a real mother! I knew you wouldn't let this family down." Jessica covered her face, tears streaming down, but I saw her clench her fists as if she were acting in a play. "Oh, Mom," she said, her voice breaking. "I knew you love him more than anyone. Thank you." Mike looked at me, his eyes clouded with exhaustion, but he still managed to say, "Mom, I owe you my life." His words broke my heart, like a stab in the chest. But then Chris jumped up and slammed his hand on the table. The impact made the teacups rattle. "No!" he shouted, his voice shaking with rage. "Mom, can't you see? You're sacrificing yourself for an evil plan. She's using you, and she's using my brother Mike." The air in the room grew thick. The only sound was the buzzing of a mosquito around the light bulb. Jessica shot to her feet and pointed at Chris. "What are you saying? You dare to accuse me? I do everything for my husband." But Chris didn't back down. He stepped closer, his eyes blazing. "Accuse you? Then what are those unlabeled bottles and those midnight phone calls?" "Mom, you can't let them fool you." I looked at Chris, then at Jessica, and finally at Mike. I wanted to say something, to ask Chris to calm down, but I couldn't. I just looked away, feeling like the whole world was crashing down on me. That night, I sat alone in my small room at the old wooden table. The oil lamp flickered, its dim light illuminating the shaky words I was writing in my will. I wrote that the little house would go to Chris, and some of my few valuables would go to Danny. Every stroke was like a cut in my soul. I didn't know if I would survive the surgery, but I wanted to be prepared to leave something for the ones I loved. John sat motionless in his wheelchair in the corner, watching me with his lifeless eyes. I saw his hand tremble, as if he wanted to say something but couldn't. I looked at him, and tears rolled down my cheeks. "John, I have to do it, right? I have to save Mike." He didn't answer, just blinked, and 2 tears fell down his gaunt cheeks. I folded the will and put it at the bottom of an old wooden box where I kept my wedding mementos. Outside, the rain was pouring down, mingling with the sound of my own sobs. Early in the morning, when the sky was still dark and fog clung to the little streets leading to the hospital, I was lying on a stretcher in an ambulance. I was clutching a small cloth bag with a couple of changes of clothes and an embroidered handkerchief I had kept since my wedding day. The ambulance siren wailed, but I was no longer paying attention. The streetlights filtered through the window, blurry like my broken dreams. I closed my eyes and tried to breathe, but my chest felt tight. Today was the day I would donate my kidney to Mike, my son. I had already decided, written my will, prepared myself mentally, but my heart was still in a knot, as if I were entering a nightmare from which I couldn't wake up. When the ambulance stopped, a nurse pushed the stretcher down an endless hospital corridor. The squeak of the wheels on the tile floor was like a hammer pounding in my head. Jessica walked right behind, her steps light but firm, like a guard's. "Don't worry, Mom," she said, her voice low but sharp. "After the surgery, everything will be fine." I glanced at her and saw a flash of triumph in her eyes, as if she had already secured her victory. Her smile sent a chill down my spine, not from the cold, but from the feeling that I was being led into a plan where I was just a pawn with no will of my own. At the reception, Jessica's parents, Mr. and Mrs. Clark, were already there. They were dressed up, Mr. Clark in an old but well-pressed suit, and Mrs. Clark in a bright red dress, as if they were attending a grand event and not a surgery. They took Jessica by the arm and greeted the doctors with an exaggerated friendliness, as if they had known each other forever. I heard Mrs. Clark laugh loudly as she said to a young doctor, "Thank you for all your support, doctor. We won't forget this favor." I just stood there clutching my cloth bag, feeling like a stranger in my own story. Mike had already been taken to a waiting room. They allowed me to see him before I went into the operating room. The small room was freezing and his thin arms were full of IV lines. His face was pale, his eyes sunken, but when he saw me, he tried to give a weak smile. "Mom, thank you," he whispered, his voice broken with exhaustion. I took his hand. It was ice cold and I felt like crying. "Mike, I'll do anything to help you get better," I told him, but my voice trembled as if I were trying to convince myself. I looked into my son's eyes, saw the absolute trust in them, and I wondered, am I doing the right thing? Or am I risking my life for something I don't fully understand? Suddenly, Chris ran in, his hands still stained with grease from work. He was panting, his t-shirt soaked with sweat, as if he had run a long way. "Mom, don't do it," he said, almost pleading as he grabbed my shoulders. "I'm begging you, don't donate the kidney. Something isn't right." I looked at Chris, saw his red eyes, filled with anger and worry. I wanted to tell him that I had already decided that I couldn't let Mike die, but the words wouldn't come out. I just put my hand on his, squeezed it gently, and let the nurse take me away. Chris stood there helpless, shouting after me, "Mom, listen to me!" But I didn't turn back. I didn't dare to turn back, because I was afraid that if I looked into Chris's eyes, I would fall apart. The hospital corridor was long and cold, the smell of disinfectant so strong it made me nauseous. An impersonal voice came over the loudspeakers. "Operating room 3, prepare for kidney transplant." They took me to a changing room where a nurse put a surgical cap and mask on me. The cold blue gown they put on me was a reminder that I was about to lose a part of my body. I looked at myself in the mirror, saw my gaunt face, my eyes surrounded by dark circles. I asked myself, "Sarah, what are you doing? Are you sure this is the right thing?" But then the image of Mike in the hospital bed appeared in my mind, and I gritted my teeth and moved forward. As I walked down the hall, I caught a glimpse of Jessica and Mrs. Clark standing by a glass window talking to an unknown man. He was wearing a black jacket and a cap that covered his face, identical to the man in the photo Chris had shown me. I saw Jessica hand him an envelope and he quickly tucked it into his jacket pocket. My heart started pounding, cold sweat running down my neck. What were they doing? What was in that envelope? I wanted to stop, to scream and demand an answer, but the nurse took my arm and led me into the operating room. Inside the OR, the white light was directly in my eyes, so bright I had to squint. Dr. Evans was there, his face serious but calm. "Everything is ready, Mrs. Miller," he said in a deep voice. "Just relax." I nodded, but my body was rigid. The nurse placed the electrodes on my chest, and the beep of the monitor was steady, but each beat felt like a warning. Jessica appeared on the other side of the glass, pressing her face against it and gesturing for me to sign quickly towards the papers another nurse was holding. I took the pen with a trembling hand, the ink smearing on the paper as I signed. It felt like I was signing my own death warrant. I looked at my blurry signature, thought about the will I had written the night before, about Chris, about Danny, and I wondered, is this the last time I'll be conscious? Just as the doctor was preparing to inject the anesthesia, my heart was pounding furiously, a cold sweat soaking my back. I closed my eyes, tried to breathe, but the images of Mike, Chris, Danny, and Jessica spun in my head. I thought about Danny's recording, the unlabeled bottle, Chris's photo. I wanted to stop everything, but I couldn't. I had come too far. I had signed. I had entered this room. I could only lie there waiting, with a fear that was choking my heart. But then, just as the nurse was about to inject the anesthesia, a loud crash shook the entire room. The door flew open, the screech of its hinges tearing through the air. The entire team of doctors and nurses jumped, some turning sharply, panic in their eyes. Danny burst in like a little whirlwind. His sneakers were still muddy, his school uniform wrinkled, and his little chest heaved as he gasped for breath. He was clutching his old cracked screen cell phone as if it were the most precious thing in the world. A nurse ran after him, shouting desperately, "Kid, you can't be in here! Oh my God, stop him!" But Danny didn't stop. He ran straight to me, his big round eyes filled with fear, but burning with a determination I had never seen in a child. "Grandma," he said, his voice trembling but so clear it froze everyone in the room. "Should I tell them the real reason my dad needs your kidney?" His words were like a bomb exploding in my head. I held my breath and my heart seemed to stop. The operating room fell into absolute silence, broken only by the beeping of the heart monitor, which now sounded louder as if trying to shatter the stillness. A nearby doctor dropped a pair of surgical forceps. The metallic sound against the tile floor was jarring like a cut in the tense air. Dr. Evans, the head surgeon, raised a hand, signaling the entire team to stop. He frowned, but his voice was calm and firm. "Let the boy speak. Whatever you have to say it now." I looked at Danny, saw his little hand clutching the cell phone, his face pale but his eyes bright, as if he were carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. Outside, behind the glass, Jessica slammed her fist on the door, making the window rattle. "Don't listen to him!" she shrieked, her voice high-pitched, almost hysterical. "He's just a kid. What does he know?" But Jessica's gaze wasn't ice-cold anymore. It was trembling, filled with panic, as if the secret she had tried so hard to hide was about to come out. Danny didn't look at his mom. He came closer to me and with trembling hands pressed play on the phone. A recording played, Jessica's voice, whispered but crystal clear, like a knife stabbing into my heart. "After the transplant, the test data will be perfect. Don't worry, that old woman won't dare to refuse." The entire room seemed to explode in silence. I felt my blood run cold, the air catching in my throat. Dr. Evans turned sharply to look at me, his eyes wide with astonishment. "Stop!" he ordered, his voice as sharp as a scalpel. "Stop all preparations right now!" A nurse quickly withdrew the syringe. The others stood motionless, not daring to move. Jessica, on the other side of the glass, let out a scream and pounded on the door. "It's not true! She made it all up! This child is being manipulated." But her voice broke, as if even she didn't believe her own words. I looked at Danny and saw him burst into tears, but he still clung to the cell phone, as if it were the last piece of evidence to save me. "I have a video too," he said, his voice choked, "of my mom and my grandparents talking about selling medicine." He played a video. The image was blurry but clear enough. Jessica and Mrs. Clark in the parking lot, exchanging an envelope with the unknown man I had seen earlier. Mrs. Clark's voice was heard. "After this operation, we'll have enough data to sell the medicine overseas. This money will change everything." I lay there, my vision blurred by tears, feeling a mix of horror and relief. Horror at the truth I had tried so hard to avoid, now exposed for everyone to see, and relief because, finally, I no longer had to lie to myself. Chris burst in from the hallway, his face red with anger. "That's enough," he shouted, lunging at the glass door to confront Jessica. "You poisoned him. Did you think we were all blind?" Before anyone could react, Chris raised his hand and slapped Jessica across the face. The sharp sound echoed through the hallway, making Mrs. Clark scream. "How dare you hit my daughter?" But Chris didn't stop. He pointed at Jessica, his voice trembling with rage. "What medicine have you been giving him? What did you do to my brother Mike?" Jessica brought a hand to her cheek, tears streaming down her face. But in her eyes, I saw no remorse, only the panic of someone who had been caught. "You're crazy," she screamed at him, turning to Dr. Evans. "Don't listen to them. They're slandering me." But Dr. Evans didn't answer. He turned pale and said to a nurse, "This is no longer a surgery. This is a crime scene. Call the police now." A nurse ran out while the others stood there, looking at each other in bewilderment. I lay there feeling the world fall apart. Tears rolled down my cheeks, but I didn't wipe them away. I looked at Danny, my little grandson, who had bravely burst into the operating room to save me. I looked at Chris, my younger son, who had tried to protect me at all costs. And I thought of Mike, my son lying in the next room, unaware that the wife he trusted had betrayed him. I just lay there, letting the tears flow, letting the truth seep into every fiber of my being. In that moment, I understood that everything had changed. The truth had exploded like a door kicked down, and nothing could hide it anymore. The operating room, once cold and silent, had turned into a chaotic battlefield. The nurses, confused, looked at each other, unsure of what to do. Dr. Evans was frowning, his sharp gaze scanning everyone, as if trying to maintain order in the midst of the storm. I lay there, my vision blurred by tears, but unable to look away from the scene. The truth Danny had just revealed, like a fire, was burning away all the trust I had left. Jessica, after Chris's slap, clutched her cheek and screamed in a shrill voice, "How dare you hit me? I do everything for my husband." Tears streamed down her face, but I clearly saw the panic in her eyes. It wasn't the pain of a wrongly accused wife, but the fear of someone who had been caught. She turned to her parents, grabbing Mrs. Clark's blouse, her voice breaking. "I didn't do anything wrong. I just wanted to save Mike. Dad, Mom, say something." But Mr. and Mrs. Clark just stood there, their faces pale, unable to say a word. His Clark, normally so cunning and bossy, now just wrung her hands, biting her lip to stop from trembling. Suddenly, Mrs. Clark slammed her cane on the floor, the sharp sound of wood against tile echoing, and she pointed directly at me. "You dared to manipulate your grandson into making up lies about my Jessica. You evil old woman." Her words were like a stab to my heart. I wanted to scream, to tell her I hadn't manipulated anyone, that it was her daughter who had betrayed my family, but a lump in my throat kept me from speaking. I just lay there, looking at her, feeling cornered in a dark place where all my years of sacrifice were being trampled on. "Mr. Clark," Jessica's father discreetly whispered to a doctor he knew who was standing nearby, his voice low but rushed, "Please continue with the surgery. We'll take care of everything. We just need this to be over." He slipped an envelope into the doctor's hand, but Dr. Evans immediately walked over, his voice as cold as ice. "The law decides here, not money." He snatched the envelope, threw it on the floor, and ordered a nurse. "Lock the doors, no one leaves. I'm going to inform hospital administration right now." The sound of his footsteps was firm, a declaration that everything had spun out of control. Chris from the hallway burst into the operating room, ignoring a nurse's attempts to stop him. He grabbed my shoulders, his eyes red, and shouted, "Mom, don't donate the kidney. It's all their plan. She poisoned my brother Mike, don't you see?" Chris's voice trembled with rage and pain. I looked into his eyes and saw the desperation of a son trying to protect his mother. I wanted to say something to comfort him, but I couldn't. I just lay there, feeling the world crumble beneath me. From the prep room next door, Mike's weak and confused voice could be heard. "What's going on? Why are you all arguing?" He tried to sit up, breathing with difficulty, the IV lines in his arm shaking with the movement. Hearing my son's voice, my heart broke into 1,000 pieces. Mike didn't know anything. He didn't know that the wife he loved, the one he trusted, had dragged the whole family into a dark conspiracy. I wanted to run to him, to hug him and tell him everything would be okay, but I couldn't move. I just lay there, tears streaming down my face, feeling torn between my love for Mike and the horrible truths that had just come to light. Danny, standing beside me, broke into heartbreaking sobs, but even so, he held up the cell phone and said in a choked voice, "I have another video. This is when my mom gives the medicine to my grandparents." He played the video, and the image appeared on the small screen. Jessica and Mrs. Clark in the parking lot, making the exchange with the unknown man. Mrs. Clark's voice was heard, clear and cold. "If the transplant is a success, we can sell the medicine overseas. With that money, we can launder all the dirty profits." The entire room fell silent. A nurse covered her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. Dr. Evans stood frozen, clutching the chart as if trying to contain his anger. In a panic, Jessica lunged to snatch the phone from Danny, trying to throw it to the ground. "No, that's fake!" she screamed, her voice cracking. But Chris was faster. He took the phone and pushed Jessica, who fell to the floor. One of her heels went flying, bouncing on the floor with a sharp click, like the final period on the charade she had created. "Shut your mouth!" Chris yelled, his face red with fury. "You think you can fool everyone? What did you do to my brother?" Jessica sat on the floor, her hair a mess, but her eyes still had a glint of defiance. "I didn't do anything. You're all slandering me." Hospital security appeared. 2 uniformed men entered with serious expressions. They approached Jessica, Mr. Clark and Mrs. Clark, giving them no time to react. Mrs. Clark was still cursing, her cane trembling in her hand. "Traitor! You destroyed this family!" She pointed at me, but her voice broke, as if she herself knew it was all over. Held firmly, Jessica struggled. "Let me go. I didn't do anything wrong." But her eyes now only reflected the desperation of someone who was cornered. I lay there motionless, my body cold, but my eyes wide open, watching the truth unfold before me. When the operating room door closed behind the police, the screams of Jessica and her parents still echoed in the hospital hallway. But to me, they were fading into the air, like a dissipating nightmare. Jessica kept shouting, her voice broken. "I was contributing to science. Nobody understands me." But no one answered her. Mr. and Mrs. Clark, who had once sat so arrogantly in my living room, now walked with their heads down, escorted in silence. I lay on the operating table, still shaking, but it was no longer from fear. A strange sense of relief washed over me, as if I had been freed from a cage I didn't even know I was in. Dr. Evans came over. His face was serious, but his gaze had softened. "Mrs. Miller," he said in a deep voice, "we are canceling the surgery. We will move Mike to an alternative treatment, dialysis combined with new medications. You risked your health preparing for this, but you have saved your life and your dignity." I looked at him, tears rolling down my cheeks, but I didn't wipe them away. "Thank you, doctor," I whispered, my voice weak but sincere. I didn't know if I had really saved my dignity, but I knew that for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again, truly breathe. Chris ran to me and helped me sit up. He took my hand tightly, his gaze firm but full of pain. "You still have me, Mom," he said, his voice breaking. "I'm going to protect you from now on, I promise." I squeezed his hand, feeling the warmth of his rough, grease-stained skin. I looked into Chris's eyes and saw the strength of his son willing to carry the whole world to protect his mother. "You're my pride, son," I whispered, and the tears fell again. Chris didn't say anything, just hugged me tightly, and in that embrace, I found a little comfort amidst the ruins of my family. Mike was moved to a recovery room. When I went in, he was lying there, his face pale and the IVs still in his arms. He looked at me, his eyes red, and asked in a weak voice, "Mom, is it true that everything my wife did was to hurt me?" His question was like a stab in my heart. I went over, sat beside him on the bed, and hugged him. My tears fell, wetting his hospital gown. "Oh, Mike, my son," I said, my voice choked. "I don't know where this all started, but I promise you, I won't let anyone hurt you ever again." Mike lowered his head, tears rolling down his thin cheeks. "Mom, I was wrong," he whispered. "I didn't protect you, and I let you suffer too much." I hugged him tighter, feeling as if it was just the two of us left in the world, holding on to each other in the middle of the storm that had just passed. In the following days, the newspapers started covering the story. "Drug trafficking ring busted at local hospital," the headlines screamed. They wrote about a group of doctors and pharmacists involved, in which Jessica, Mr. Clark, and Mrs. Clark were key players. They had been testing illegal drugs on patients like Mike, using the kidney transplant as a smokescreen to collect data for an international organization. Reading those words filled me with horror and pain. I thought of Jessica, of the times she served me food, of her sweet words that I now knew were lies. I thought of Mike, of the months he suffered not knowing his own wife was endangering him. Mike began his dialysis and medication treatment. His health improved slowly but steadily. One afternoon, he took my hand, lowered his head, and said with a broken voice, "Mom, I was blind." I trusted Jessica. and I almost let you lose everything." I stroked his head, like when he was a little boy, and told him, "Son, the important thing is that you're still here. That's all I need." But in my heart, a scar had formed, not just from Jessica's betrayal, but because I had let myself be led to the edge of life and death without asking any questions. I went back to my little house, where John was still motionless in his wheelchair. I sat beside him and told him everything, from Danny's recording to the scene of Jessica being handcuffed. I don't know if he understood it all, but when I finished speaking, I saw him blink, and 2 tears rolled down his gaunt cheeks. I took his hand, squeezed it, and for the first time in years, I felt a small response from him, a faint squeeze, as if he were trying to tell me he understood. I burst into tears, not of pain, but because I knew that, despite everything, I still had him. I still had my family. Danny became the neighborhood's little hero. The day he came to my house, he ran to me, wrapped his arms around my neck, and whispered, "Grandma, I'm sorry it took me so long to speak up, but at least I got there in time to save you." I laughed through my tears, hugging the boy, feeling the warmth of his small body. "You are the bravest person I know," I told him, ruffling his hair. Danny smiled, the first smile I had seen on his face in days. I looked into his eyes and saw that his innocence was still there, though it was stained by what he had been forced to witness. I promised myself I would protect Danny, to give him a childhood that no one could ever steal from him. The last night, I sat in my small room under the flickering light of the oil lamp. I opened my old journal and wrote the final lines. "Blood doesn't always make you family. Sometimes it's the truth that shows you who really deserves to be called that." I lost a lot, but I found myself. I closed the journal, put down the pen, and listened to the rain hitting the patio roof. I felt a strange calm, as if the storm had passed, leaving a clear sky behind. I looked out the window, saw the pale moonlight illuminating the yard, and I knew that even though the road ahead would be long, I would never let myself be blinded again. I had reclaimed my own strength, and that was the most valuable thing anyone could ever take from me. The story you have just heard has had names and locations changed to protect the identities of those involved. We don't tell this to judge, but in the hope that someone will listen and stop to think. How many mothers are suffering in silence inside their own homes? I truly wonder, if you were in my place, what would you do? Would you choose to stay silent to keep the peace? Or would you dare to face it all to get your voice back? I want to know your opinion, because every story is like a candle that can light the way for someone else. God always blesses, and I'm convinced that courage leads us to better days. In the meantime, on the end screen, I'm leaving you 2 of the channel's most loved stories. I'm sure they will surprise you. Thank you for staying with me until this moment.